Welcome back to the Law News Network. I'm your host, Caroline Polisi, and court is on recess in the Lewis Toledo trial out of Florida. Toledo stands trial for the murder of his wife, Yesenia Suarez, and her 2 children, ages 8 and 9, and the bodies have not been found. I'm joined today with LawNewz's very own Aaron Keller. Aaron, thank you for being here.
Good to be in early today.
Yeah, and so we published on LawNewz.com for all of our viewers to go to an amazing article that you just wrote entitled "The Domestic Violence Law That Might Have Saved This Family's Life." Can you tell us a little bit about your reporting here?
Well, a couple of things. So, look, primarily, who's responsible in a domestic violence situation? Well, if the prosecutor's version of events is correct, in this case, it's Lewis Toledo, okay? But I always think that there's another story behind the legal mechanism as to how things work. And in this case, I think that the police records from October 22nd, 2013, the day of that 911 call you just played, are in many ways more critical to the underlying issue here than what happened on the 23rd, which is the day of the alleged murder here. So you start going into those police records on the 22nd, and what you see is evidence that this was waiting to happen. Mm-hmm. It was predicted in the police records. So we know the facts, the trajectory of what happened here. There's
take us through that.
The 911 call in the workplace, okay? The receptionist calls 911. You can hear the commotion in the background. You just played that call. All of our viewers just heard that again. Well, the police were called. They showed up as Toledo is taking off, okay? So they don't catch up with him on the scene, but the investigators are there to figure out what happened. So here's what we've got. We've got a myriad of police documents. Some are officer narratives that basically lay out, okay, I'm the officer and here's what everyone told me, okay? Some are witness statements that, including witness statements that were actually signed and written by Yesenia Suarez herself in her own handwriting and with her own signature. And they're scary to read because they set the stage for ultimately what happened the very next day. There are also a number of checklists that officers use in this jurisdiction in Florida to try to make sense of what happened. In other words, to see how serious this particular allegation of domestic violence is compared with other incidents of domestic violence. So I took a look at all of them that were publicly available. And here's what we've got. One of the forms is called the Domestic Violence Assessment Referral Inquiry. Okay, here's what came out of that form. Again, this is October 22nd, so this is the day of the workplace encounter. This is the day before the alleged murder.
Okay, but just so our viewers know, was there any police contact made between the defendant or the victim here for any prior incidences?
Not that I can find prior to the 22nd. So the 22nd is when...
So it's the first time police have been involved in this couple's sort of domestic relationship to date.
So far as I can find. Okay, so, but here's what they get told on the 22nd. Suarez says, yeah, Toledo said he would kill me, said how he would kill me. Okay, so there's a plan. There's evidence that there was some kind of a plan that Toledo is accused by Suarez, his wife, whose murder trial we're watching right now. Okay, he says how he's going to kill her on the 22nd. He says, she says that she believed he could actually go through with it. So not only is there an articulation of a plan, but there's a fear on behalf of the victim that it could come true. She says that Toledo strangled her. Okay, so then you have...
When did he strangle her?
At some point prior to the 22nd.
Not that day, okay.
Yeah, I don't know if there's an actual date that I can recall off the top of my head, but she said that it had happened, and her mother also had been told that it had happened. Okay, so things are clearly escalating in this relationship if we're to believe what she tells the police on the 22nd. She says Toledo had physically harmed her 1 to 5 times. Okay, now how many
in their relationship? Okay.
How many times that had happened, we don't know, but it's somewhere in the 1 to 5 margin according to the one checklist. He had threatened to harm her with a knife, she tells officers.
Remember, we saw that knife being, a photograph of it being given to Toledo in that interrogation, so we know he did keep a knife.
He had some kind of a scary looking knife. Yeah. Now, whether that was the knife, we don't know, but again, we find a knife. We've got an accusation that there were threats with a knife. Maybe a jury could put 2 and 2 together. She also tells the officer that he had attempted to control her activities, okay? That he had a history of violence against other partners prior to her, that he had held on to her against her will, and that, quote, jealousy is what causes him to become violent. Okay, so that's just one of the forms in this case. This checklist of all of this stuff that she, the victim, Yesenia Suarez, alleges Luis Toledo did to her. Go into some of the other records from the 22nd, and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. There's another checklist that they used. So we went through the first checklist. There's another checklist that he had physically harmed her, threatened her with a knife. Again, some of the same allegations, but there's more. Tried to strangle her, had stalked, followed, or watched her, was jealous of her friendships, had a violent history with other partners. We heard that before. She reports it again. Had been violent in front of others, that Toledo had been significantly stressed, had held her against her will, had thrown her, and had mentioned suicide or homicide. So every one of these forms just gets another layer of the distress in this relationship. And again,
and all sort of telltale signs of a domestic violence situation, of a potentially escalating nature of the situation.
Exactly. Okay, right. So you have threats, and then you have physical harm, and then you have physical harm in the workplace where there are other witnesses around to at least see some of it and record sound of some of it.
But I have a question about this, because there is a discrepancy over whether or not violence actually occurred in the workplace. What do we know for sure happened there that day?
So, well, it depends on one's definition of violence, I guess, but apparently no one actually saw him strike her, and there was no security camera that caught it.
Right.
It was apparently at the end of a hallway, and no one actually saw it happen. So it was a he said, she said.
Well, I heard that police investigators noticed sort of a red mark on her cheek.
They did say that,
thereafter.
yes.
Okay,
they said that there was some kind of a red mark on her left cheek, which is where she said she was struck, and apparently it was loud enough where she let out a pretty loud scream, and other people heard the scream.
Okay.
So,
you know, I saw Julie Rendelman on here, and I think she was discussing it with you. You know, when you hear that 911 call, it's bad. We know he's there. We can hear him in the background, but it's not to the point of, you know, him boiling over with such sort of hatred and out of controlness that you actually hear violence occurring there. And she was saying that you know, could be a sort of a point for the defense, that, you know, he wanted to confront her, of course, but he wasn't violent. But of course, we don't know what actually happened.
Well, you know, there's the accusation of the strike in the face.
Right.
And okay, look, I mean, does it mean he showed up with a gun and pointed it at her? Was it that severe? No. But is it bad enough on its face? I would argue that it is. And maybe some of that is hindsight being 20/20, but it looks to me like there is enough in the statements that she gave to police on the 22nd to foreshadow, to forewarn what some of what ultimately is alleged to have occurred on the 23rd. You know, it goes further and further here. You know, and look, there are points to the defense in some of these documents. She did say that he had not been violent or threatening to her children. She said he didn't get high or drunk regularly. Then in another form, she says he didn't try to control her activities, but in the form we just talked about, she said he did. So that's the only real discrepancy that I can find in these statements, but it does exist.
But there are discrepancies in a lot of instances in which women come forward. They often do change their story because of fear of retaliation for having gone to the authorities in the first place. So it's not uncommon for victims of domestic violence to have inconsistencies in their statements to police.
Yeah, and that's really the only one that jumped out at me is, you know, did he or did he not try to control her activities? Well, I mean, when you added up against some of the other weight of the evidence, it would seem to me that it's kind of a minor point. It may have just been a mistake on a form.
Right.
Because some of the forms, it's the officer checking things off, probably while she's speaking. Okay, I'm speculating a little bit there, but some of the forms appear to be in the officer's handwriting, not in her handwriting. So, you know, look, who knows why that discrepancy is there, but in theory, could a defense attorney attack it? Yes. You know, another thing is she says that he didn't have access to weapons, but then there's the accusation that he had threatened her with a knife. Well, I don't know, did whoever filled the form out, or did she not presume that that a knife was a weapon? I'm not sure. Maybe that question is reserved for things like firearms. I don't know. But Look, it seems to me that there's a lot in there that could have been used to try to mitigate this situation.
But what could they have done? So tell us, what are the laws? What could they have done? I mean, look, I'm sitting here, I see, again, hindsight is 20/20. I see what you're saying. But I mean, if we put every scorned lover who confronted their spouse for having an affair behind bars, I mean, that's not what sort of our criminal justice system is about. We don't put people behind bars for thinking, for bad things that they think in their mind.
Or for flipping out verbally.
Exactly.
Okay, now, so here's where I would draw the line. And before I even get into the legal discussion, I would draw the line that when you've got a battery, okay, or an accusation of a battery and at least some evidence of a battery, well, that's where it draws the line and becomes criminal. If a couple of people who are married or who are in a relationship of some sort get into a verbal fight, I don't think the law enforcement system needs to step in unless, again, there's some really clear plan that there's additional threatening. And before I get into the whole legal analysis, if you don't mind, I'll beg your patience, Caroline.
Anything for you, Aaron.
let me get into a little bit more of some of what these police records show, because it sets the stage again for what ultimately is alleged to have occurred on the 23rd. So let's dial back again into the 22nd. She then, after these checklists, which I just described in the records from the 22nd, she gets into these. She gets into an actual narrative that she writes out and signs. It repeats a lot of what we know about what happened in this workplace incident, but she did say that he came to her workplace with, quote, accusations. So one thing that's interesting is the records really don't make any clear reference to this affair.
Right.
She just refers to them as accusations, so she's kind of downplaying what's going on beneath this relationship.
Well, at that point, if we can take our viewers back, she was still sort of waffling to Toledo on whether or not this affair actually hadn't taken place. Remember, she'd recanted her story to him, saying that she only told him that it had happened because she, in fact, wanted a divorce, but it wasn't really true. So, it doesn't seem that far-fetched to me that she would be somewhat apprehensive to share sort of all of the details with police enforcement on the day that he came there.
Yeah, for a couple different reasons.
Right.
It could have been embarrassment. It could have been because she knew he was going to flip out, which is what he had been doing. There were these increasing threats in the relationship. Actually, I'm going to take that back. They weren't necessarily increasing, but they existed, according to her version of the events in the records. So she says that in that altercation that we played in the 911 call, you can't hear it in the call, but she said she, quote, begged him to stop acting crazy. Mm-hmm. So that's another one of the little nuggets of information that's in her sworn statement. Now here's where things started to change on the 22nd. So they went and interviewed the mother on the 23rd after she and the kids went missing. And ultimately that the mother gave some other information that kind of shines some light on this. Before I get to that, though, let me go into what she ultimately said to the police on the 22nd. So this is Suarez, the victim, who's presumed murdered here. She said that she was in fear of the defendant. She tells the police she's in fear of the defendant, that she did not want the defendant to return to their home. Okay? That's what she told police on the 22nd. And I think that that's really critical, because ultimately he went back home and the mother said she joined him. So something changed on the night of the 22nd.
Right.
And that's again, one of these disturbing facts. But she had told the police she did not want him around the house. Okay.
But just to play devil's advocate here, I see what you're saying, but I mean, it's that man's house as well. So if you're saying that the police at that point should have stepped in, arrested Toledo, making sure that he didn't go back to the house that evening, I mean, I don't know if I agree with you.
I'm not necessarily saying that, but what's interesting is how the events change. Okay, so she's telling the police at the workplace on the 22nd she does not want the guy back home. Okay, that she was in fear of him, and that whatever contact she wanted with him outside of the home, she wanted nonviolent contact. She didn't go so far as to say she never wanted to ever see him again, period.
Right.
Okay. She did say there were, quote, multiple past incidents of unreported domestic violence. So they get into that a little bit. Okay, she did tell police she was going to be staying at her mother's house. And ultimately, that's where she went after the workplace incident on the 22nd. So she told them, and it was part of like a confidential area of the reports. At this point, it's public, okay? But that's where she said she was going to be staying, which the mother testified at the trial that, yes, if anything had happened to her, she would have come to me. So she made it pretty clear that she was going to stay at her mother's and that she didn't want him around the house, okay? So that's how things get left to the police. And she did say she wanted to be notified immediately if he were to be released from jail at some point.
Okay.
And she did make it clear that she wanted her whereabouts confidential.
Okay, but we also have, from subsequent police interrogation, we also have Jacinia texting Luis that evening around 7:24, 7:42, saying, "Where are you? Why aren't you at home?" I mean, it would indicate sort of that she had maybe had sort of a change of heart, that she wanted to work things out with him.
And that's exactly what the mother ultimately told police. So,
okay.
So here's where things start to switch, and I'm jumping over into the a couple of things in a second here that the mother said. So here's how this police interaction with her ends on the 22nd. They give her a packet explaining her legal rights in a domestic violence situation. They give her an appointment to speak with the prosecutors, and it's
28th.
It's the 25th, actually, I think, at 9 o'clock is how they set it up. So the 22nd, 3 days later, she's supposed to meet with the prosecutors. She never makes it, because she disappears on the day after the workplace incident. And interestingly enough, they also gave her a hotline for an emergency shelter. There's no evidence that in the documents or elsewhere that I can find that she actually took that step to use it.
Okay.
So
So that was an option for her. I mean, I think that's an important point. An option for her. She could have fled and gone to this center that would have taken her and her children, I presume, in had she felt like she was in imminent danger, correct?
Yeah, so she says she's in fear of him. She says that there are threats that he's going to kill her. She says all of that, but she doesn't take that step. And again, I don't know why. I can't get in her head, but this is what the documentation indicates that she was confronted with as a possible option. So now, interestingly enough, the police wound up talking to Toledo by phone after the incident on the 22nd, and a lot of it's still blacked out of the police report, so I can't read it all. Okay. But what I do know is this, that he told the officer, he argued with the officer about the nature of any possible charges. Because the officer basically said, okay, look, this is a battery situation. You can be charged. Apparently, he argued about the nature of the charges.
At the workplace battery.
This is the workplace incident. So apparently, right after that, they got a hold of him on the phone. The police called Toledo on the phone or spoke with him somehow by phone. They may have actually still been at the workplace when they got him on the phone.
Right.
I'm not sure exactly when it was. But they said that he argued about the nature of the charges, that he told the police that they had no jurisdiction to arrest him, which is interesting, and then he hung up on the officer.
Got it.
So that's where everything ends with that. Now let's jump into what the mother ultimately told police about what happened that evening.
Right. Can I just say, what I think is so interesting hearing you talk about this is that in all of the interrogation videos that we've seen of this defendant, multiple times he reiterates, in fact, the way he met his wife was, in fact, I think she had been sort of accosted out at a club, and he kind of came to her rescue, and he said that, you know, a man should never hit a woman. He also, when he broke down, he said, you know, I would never intentionally hurt her. The irony of the whole situation is that she was the one that sort of attacked me all the time. I never laid a hand on her, and that I, of anybody, you know, felt this sort of duty, this, you know, to have this kind of old school ideal that I was going to be her protector. So it's very sort of ironic when we're hearing sort of...
It's ironic, and it's also interesting. You make a good point, because read it into the context of one of his versions of the way she died, and that is that he claims that she put her hands around his neck, and then he responded back by killing her.
Right, self-defense.
Yeah, now... I don't know. Does it make a lot of sense? I'm not sure. I don't have a lot of witnesses here to explain whether or not that's in her character or not.
Right.
But look, this is the way this is said to have gone down according to these records. So where things get interesting is in the mother's statement to police about what happened on the 22nd. You keep in mind that she's speaking on the 23rd after they all go missing.
Right.
So she and the kids go to the mother's house on the afternoon right after or very shortly after the workplace incident, which is what she told police she was going to do. She said, I'm going to go to my mom's. I don't want my whereabouts disclosed by you, the police, but I'm going to my mom's. The mom says, yes, she did show up. So she goes there, okay, with the kids in the afternoon. Toledo shows up at about 6 p.m. to try to patch things up somehow. Okay, this is what the mother says. And then he left to go home at about 7 o'clock. So he goes home. Yesenia Suarez and the kids are still at the mother's house. And then the mother says at some point in the next 45 minutes, she changes her mind and decides to go home to, quote, make amends with Toledo.
And sleep in her own bed or something, right? She said, I'm going to sleep in my own bed tonight. I want to figure this out or something.
The sleep in my own bed thing isn't in the records that I reviewed pertinent to the 22nd incident. The version of it that I have in the actual statement is to make amends. But it fits, certainly. So the mother basically says, ultimately, here's the deal that they had worked out. That apparently they were going to split up. I mean, she told the police they were going to split up on the 22nd. The mother knew that they were going to split up. Apparently, Suarez makes a deal with Toledo that he can stay in the house until he has enough money to move out. So she goes back home at about 7:45, and ultimately that's the end of the mother's knowledge. So again, it's interesting. She says she wants no contact with him. She says she doesn't want him in the house. That's what she tells the police. She then later goes home where he is, and the last time she's heard from is shortly after 1 a.m. when she's on the phone with the lover. And sometime between there and about 5 a.m. is when prosecutors believe she was murdered. Now, it's kind of interesting. They didn't swear a warrant out for him related to the domestic violence incident until the 28th, but they arrested him on the 23rd. And the defense has tried to attack the fairness of that, but it didn't go anywhere. My assumption is because there was probable cause without a warrant. You know, it gets into an interesting procedural discussion, but that's kind of weird. So the big question is, why did this happen on the 22nd, right?
Right.
You know, and here's what jumped into my mind. I know that a number of states have mandatory arrest laws after domestic violence reports, and there are different versions of these laws. Some are very strict and some are a little bit more lenient, but
now, is it just after reports, or I'm assuming that there has to, look, I haven't studied these laws, but I'm assuming that there must be some sort of indicia of reliability. You can't just, a woman can't just pick up the phone and say, I was assaulted, arrest my husband immediately, can she?
Not in the majority of the jurisdictions that have it. There might be one out there that is that severe. So I've got a list of all the 50 states and how they deal with this. And look, about half of the states and the District of Columbia have these some provision of a mandatory arrest law. Now, in some cases, like New Hampshire, there's a couple of other states, it only kicks in if there is a direct violation of a restraining order or some other no contact order.
Which makes sense.
That makes sense. You violate a no contact order, we're going to arrest you and we're going to pull you out of that situation because you've been warned.
I get that. I totally get that.
That's still considered a mandatory arrest law. Now, there are other jurisdictions, you know, Colorado's is pretty wide open. Colorado says if there is probable cause to believe, so there's got to be what you said, an indicia of reliability.
Right.
That something happened, bam, it's mandatory arrest. We are going to diffuse the situation right then and there.
And take him into custody?
Take him into custody.
For how
it is
long?
I didn't get into. I
wow.
know that, but
and that's pretty severe.
There are a lot of states that do it this way. So look, Arizona says where a victim has been physically injured. So there's got to be either physical injury along with domestic violence, or where there is a weapon either used or displayed. Then it's mandatory arrest. The perpetrator gets carted off to jail. End of story. That is how 26 well, it's 25 states, I think, and DC have decided we are going to deal with this to prevent what is alleged to have happened in the Lewis Toledo case with Yesenia Suarez and the kids. Now, Florida does not have one of these mandatory arrest provisions. There's 3 different types of states. Okay, there's 3 different types of states. There are some that do the mandatory arrest. There are some that are so-called pro-arrest or preferred arrest states, where the law says we prefer that officers take people into custody in these domestic violence situations, but it doesn't require it, okay? And there are only
it's more of a discretionary sort of law on the part of the
it tips the scale. In other words, you should do it, but you don't have to, okay? And then there are others where it's just completely discretionary. So by my count, there were about 6 states that fall into this encouraged arrest, this pro-arrest area, okay? And there are 40 states that have the may arrest. Now you're sitting here saying, why doesn't your math add up? And it's because a lot of states have a mix of both. California has all 3. Depends on the severity of what happened. So, you know, if there is actually a, you know, some of the states turn around and say, if it involves a weapon or a physical strike, it's mandatory arrest. If it's, you know, some other thing, it's preferred arrest, and otherwise, if it's just a call, it's a may arrest, depending on how bad you think it is. I mean, a lot of states have different tiers in this.
Makes sense.
But the bottom line is look, you know, I mean, can we a legislator with whom I was friends in the Midwest used to say there's no way we can legislate for someone's poor upbringing or bad behavior in every circumstance. But the increasing trend seems to be to push towards these mandatory arrest states in at least something.
And I assume it's because these laws have been proposed in the wake of situations just like we're presented with here.
This one.
People saying, look, this could have been preventable. We saw all the writing on the wall here. Let's do something in our criminal justice system to address this issue and hopefully save lives. So I'm assuming that that was the sort of impetus behind many of these laws.
Exactly. It's why the piece that I wrote for LawNewz.com, it's up right now for everybody who wants to read everything we're talking about. It's there, it's detailed, and I made sure that I left no stone in these documents unturned. But the name of the piece is The Law That May Have Saved This Family's Life, because if Florida was a mandatory arrest state or had some version of it, okay, maybe not the most extreme version or the most lenient version of it, but if Florida had the law in place that said, look, you hit somebody who's a domestic partner of some sort, a wife, someone with whom you're in a relationship, then there's a mandatory arrest provision that kicks in. Now, a lot of the states that have mandatory arrest laws put a limit on it. You can't call and say, oh, he did it last week. That doesn't work. They say it's got to be within like 12 hours, or as you pointed out, there has to be some other evidence that it happened.
And I think that goes to an addition of reliability. I think the closer in time to the incident occurring, it's more believable. You have, you know, you can believe the alleged victim more so than if it were sort of a retroactive accusation.
Yeah, so, you know, look, and these laws are not without their critics, because a lot of people would turn around and say, hey, look, you know, some of this stuff should be settled in another means other than an immediate incarceration. And when I worked in Wisconsin as a journalist, before I had a law degree, we used to do stories about this because there were situations where, you know, somebody would call 911, and Wisconsin has a relatively strict version of this mandatory arrest law. It's not the most strict, but it's relatively strict. And, you know, there would be calls that, you know, and I know it sounds stereotypical, but these were the actual stories that would happen. You know, somebody would get upset about a loss at a Green Bay Packers game and, you know, would punch the wall out, scream at his family. The wife would call 911 and they'd have to arrest the guy when, you know, the critics would say, hey, look, he's just going to boil down because there's another game coming up next week and the team will be fine or something like that. And so, you know, there are some people who say that they're way too strict. I think that it's at least a colorable argument. There are some people who say that by carting somebody off to prison immediately, if the person winds up getting out, they may be more riled up and may do more harm to the alleged victim. And
well, and it may have a chilling effect really on women calling to report instances of domestic violence if they know that, you know, the potential is for their husband or their partner to go to jail. They could fear retaliation for that. So I think it could potentially have a chilling effect on women coming forth.
it could, you know, and these are policy considerations for a legislator to look at. You know,
right.
I think that in this case, we, you know, we have the facts on the table to suggest, look, you know, Toledo is accused of harming her prior to the 22nd. She says on the 22nd that he's threatened to kill me. He said how he wants to kill me. He has strangled me. He's grabbed me. He's threatened me with a knife. And today he shows up at my workplace with a bunch of witnesses and hits me. There's not a witness to the direct strike, but she's got a red mark. She's out in the hallway screaming. We've got the 911 call. Look, you know, if there was a mandatory arrest provision of some sort in Florida that covered that, is the chance that she and the kids would still be alive? Well, I think that it's at least arguable that they could be.
Interesting. Very, very interesting, Aaron. I mean, the article is fabulous. I would encourage all of our viewers to go to LawNewz.com. It's up on the website live now. Take a look, read through the details there. We're going to talk more with Aaron about this, but I want to get sort of in the mode of our new case that we're covering here at LawNewz, Willis trial. I want to play for our viewers defense's opening statements so you can get reacquainted with that case. We are going to go live in the courtroom there at 1:30. So take a listen to defense's opening statements in the Willis case.
The witnesses have been sequestered out of those necessary parties as unusual suspects. The witnesses have been sequestered out of those necessary parties as unusual suspects. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My remarks won't take nearly as long here because we're taking a different approach in this particular matter than the prosecutor is. Quite frankly, we think at the end of the day, when you finally get this matter, that the evidence will show and that the instructions will indicate that you are here to decide only one thing, and that's what happened with Rebecca Bletch. That these other informations about these other parties, Ms. Herringa and MJN, they're just not before you. And that this Rebecca Bletch's situation that you're going to be asked to decide, and that's what we'll be focusing on during the course of this trial. Quite frankly, we believe that once you hear that story as a part of some other grand scheme of things, with a lot of different information in it that may or may not be interpreted as the prosecutor would like you to, that you will find that my client is not responsible for Ms. Bletch's death. What we want you to hear during the course of this trial was that obviously we're conceding that Ms. Bletch was murdered. That's a question that's just there's no issue to. She was out jogging and minding her own business, living her own life. She was a mother and a wife and did nothing to deserve what happened to her. And that this is just that this is what happened. What you're going to find out is that the day before Ms. Bletch died, she was in an argument. She was in an argument with her husband, Kevin Bletch, and that there was this issue that came up. Kevin Bletch, the husband, wanted to take their daughter Ellie and go up to their cabin in a place called Luther, about 2 hours from their home. And he wanted to take her up to that cabin, and he wanted to take her up on June 29th, the Sunday when Ms. Bletch was killed. The significance of that is that normally Ellie, who was a 16-year-old at the time, jogs with her mother on that day. That's the day that they usually get together and they go out, they go jogging, and quite frankly, the explanation for why Mr. Bletch wanted Ellie to go with him didn't really make a lot of sense to a lot of people. Certainly it didn't make sense to Rebecca. Quite frankly, he wanted to go up to Luther to mow the lawn. It's a 2-hour trip, and they were going to go up there the following week anyway because they had company coming. They're all going to go up and enjoy this location. And And so to go up, take 2 hours to go up there and mow the lawn for 20 minutes and then come back, it just didn't make a lot of sense to her, especially when it meant that Ellie couldn't come with her mom and go jogging. Kevin Bletch won the argument. Ellie got in the car with her dad, and they went up and were 2 hours away when Rebecca was murdered. She was running alone. Had her daughter been there, she'd had company. What you're going to find out is the police later discovered that there are 2 life insurance policies on Rebecca Bletch, totaling about $200,000. And that's some facts that you have to take with you. As we turn and focus on a man by the name of Bloom. Mr. Bloom is my client's cousin. Mr. Bloom knew Rebecca Bletch. Their kids played soccer together. And it appears that Mr. Bloom had at least some sort of fascination with Rebecca Bletch because he was Facebook stalking her. He was following her on Facebook and trying to contact her and get information about her. It also appears that Mr. Bloom was in financial difficulty. He was bankrupt. Further, it looks as if there may have been a connection between Mr. Bloom and Kevin Bletch, the husband. There's a club that they both had an association with to different degrees, but it is our expectation that that's where the two of them at least had met, maybe, and perhaps maybe even more than that. You should know that Mr. Bloom is an expert marksman. He trained firearms to Air Force recruits when they went into the service. He was one of the guys who trained them in firearms. It should also be noted that Mr. Bloom had basically the run of his cousin, Mr. Willis's home. Mr. Bloom knew of the gun, and there's some indication that he's actually fired the gun, that he knew of the van and had access to the van. And in fact, the testimony will be that we expect that some of the materials in the van were actually some of his stuff. There's some sporting goods that were found in the van as well that Mr. Bloom placed there. These two guys had been close. Mr. Willis doesn't lock his door. A lot of folks in that area don't. And his cousin would have been able to get in and knew where things were, including the gun. We think that the evidence will show that the shots that killed Ms. Bletch were well placed. We think that Ms. Bletch, and you'll be shown photographs of her belongings stacked on the side of the road. We think that Ms. Bletch was ultimately stopped, was running, that we think she knew the person that stopped her, and that she was running away when she realized what danger she was in. We think that the evidence will show that the shots that killed her were from a 22 handgun, and that she was moving away, she was running away, and these shots were at distance, and we think that the evidence will show that this is not the kind of shooting that a casual gun owner can accomplish. These were shots well placed from a distance. We think that what you're going to find is that there are circumstances beyond what we've talked about this morning that would indicate that it was, in fact, Mr. Bloom who's done the shooting here. We believe that there will be testimony from police officers that will indicate that the day before, the couple of days before, they were closing in on Mr. Bloom, talk to him about this circumstance, he wipes his computer clean. He then wipes his cell phone clean. We believe that the police will indicate that he was a person who was a person of interest to them. That he had details about Mrs. Bletch's murder that weren't released to the public. In other words, he had inside information. And we believe that Mr. Bloom had both the motive and the opportunity to do this shooting, and that he is in fact the person who did it. And that he is in fact the person who returns materials that he's taken from his cousin back to where he found them after he used them, and has left his cousin here to carry the weight. We believe that once you hear all the evidence to find my client not guilty, we believe that you'll hear evidence that's widely circumstantial, and we'll talk about that. That evidence of circumstantial nature that could indicate different outcomes, and not necessarily the one the prosecutor wants you to believe. And that when you hear all that information, that you'll come back with a verdict of not guilty in this particular matter. Thank you, ladies.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Nick?
Welcome back to the Law News Network. I'm your host, Caroline Polisi, and court is on recess in the trial of Willis Toledo. He is on trial for the murder of his wife, Yesenia Suarez, and her 2 children, ages 8 and 9. We're about to take you live to the courtroom at 1:30 in the trial of Jeffrey Willis for the murder of Rebecca Bletch. That took place on June 29th, 2014. She was jogging, and the prosecution says that as part of an attempt to kidnap, rape, and kill her, which went bad, this man, you see him there on your screen now, Jeffrey Willis, killed Rebecca Bletch. I'm joined here today with Aaron Keller from LawNewz. Aaron, thanks for being with us today.
It's disorienting
I
to
know.
be on this side of the table when we switch chairs like
I
this.
kind of like it. I like it.
You like the
Yeah.
control.
Yes,
that
exactly.
You can see more of what's going
Right.
on from over
Exactly.
there. So,
Exactly.
You know.
Now, we just showed our viewers defense's opening statements in the Jeffrey Willis case, and I want your just initial takes on it before I share mine with you.
Well, look, I mean, so what that she had life insurance adding up to $200,000? If they have a house in a camp, that whole part from the defense, I just thought was a thrust in the dark that was just very, very bad. I didn't like it because trying to blame the victim's family for something that happened to her, I don't think
Right.
there's any evidence to indicate that the family was in on something.
Right.
So when you do that as an attorney, people look at you on the jury and say, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You know, look, I mean, unless they've got some piece of evidence that I don't know about, I thought that was in bad taste. I think it came across like it was in bad taste. Now, this whole thing about blaming the cousin, Kevin Bloom.
Right.
Now, that's, at first I looked at it and said, I'm just not down with that either. Like, it doesn't make sense based on what we know from the Jessica Harenga murder accusation, which this defendant, Jeffrey Willis, is also facing. How did he get implicated? Well, because his cousin, Kevin Bloom, told police, he called me up to go over to his late grandfather's house, and the body's laying in the basement, and I helped him bury it. Now, at first blush, this cousin is the guy that's ratting out this defendant, Willis, and at first I'm like, would the cousin have shot this woman, in this case, Rebecca Bletch, with this .22 weapon that was found in this defendant's van? Okay, at first I thought it was kind of crazy, and I didn't really think it was that great of an opening, but then this one fact bothers me. The cousin comes across like this guy who kind of goes along probably because he's in fear. I mean, he shows up, there's a body, he's told to help hide it. Well, what do? Do you hide it, or do you risk getting killed yourself?
Right.
So he goes along, then contacts the police, okay? But this one nagging fact just bugs me, and that's that they never found the body in the Jessica Harenga case, okay? The photos of the area show it's this abandoned railroad bed, okay? The ground looks like it's, in many of the areas, like it's barely been disturbed, okay? So, look.
There she is up on your screen for our
Police
viewers.
keep saying, yeah, okay, they never found her body. That's Jessica Harenga, okay? the police are saying, oh, well, the body was moved after it was buried. Well, what's the chance of that? I mean, something isn't connecting here. Maybe the body was moved, but I want to see evidence that there's disturbed ground. I want to see these ground sonar scans that says, oh, yeah, we think it was here. There's evidence that the ground was disturbed, because it's this place where people, at least from the photos I've seen, would not be frequently digging.
Right.
Okay, so where did her body wind up? And is Kevin Bloom telling the truth? Well, I would say, I'm tempted to say yes, he is. Okay, and that Jeffrey Willis is guilty of all of this stuff, but the one part of it that's just not connecting for me is, where is the body in the other case? So I don't know, did Kevin Bloom lie about everything to try to point the finger at Willis? Okay, not only in the Haringa case, but also in this case? Or were they both involved in these sprees and escapades and whatnot, and it's just a case of where one guy is going to face all the punishment and one guy is going to get off mostly scot-free? I mean, I know that he's got some other charges, Kevin Bloom himself, but it's an interesting tactic. At first, to answer your question more concretely, I just was turned off by this whole defense opening, but then I was thinking about it on the way home yesterday, and that one nagging fact that they'd never found the body tends to call into question the accuracy of what Kevin Bloom had told police about the Haringa case, and therefore, could it be used, at least theoretically, to raise some doubt in the Bletch case that we're looking at resuming in about half an hour from now? Maybe. It's a stretch, but I'm at least willing to listen because of that issue about where is the body.
Well, interesting. I appreciate your commentary, and you may have changed my mind too, because just sitting here listening to you, you kind of won me over there. But you know, I initially was very turned off by the defense's opening statement here. But probably, as I reflect on it now, probably because I know about this guy's priors. I know what kind of a guy this was, and I'm doing exactly what, you know, I would tell any jury if I were the defense attorney to not do, which is that I am assuming, based on the prior bad acts of this man, that of course he committed this murder, because he sounds like a really horrible guy. Can you tell our viewers a little bit more about the other crimes that he's implicated in?
Well, look, I mean, he's accused of a whole mess of stuff here. He's accused of, if you go in order of time here, and you know, I've got to take really copious notes because there are so many acts here. So you've got this April 26th, 2013 alleged murder of Jessica Haringa. Okay, she's the blonde who worked in a convenience store. This particular defendant, Jeffrey Willis, had been known to show up at the convenience store. Okay, so they had prior contact. Then she disappears. The case goes unsolved for a while. A year later, on June 29th, 2014, that's when Rebecca Bletch was found on the side of the road and died within minutes of the finding of her. Okay, so then that, you skip ahead to 2014, you've got
kind of
Rebecca
like Quentin
Bletch.
Tellis. It's kind of like, you know, once he's investigated for another crime, it leads them back to this initial crime.
They start going into some of these other things. Okay, so then you fast forward a couple more years, and you've got this teenage girl who's 16. This is April 2016, where she says Jeffrey Willis is the guy who tried to abduct her, and the only reason she's still alive, she claims, is because his gun jammed when he tried to shoot her when she was trying to escape. So the gun jams, she gets away, and that's when authorities really zone in on this guy, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, silver van. We had a silver van way back in the Jessica Haringa case, okay, the blonde who worked in the convenience store. And they, you know, so they zone
shell
in.
casings, they matched up or something?
Well, the shell casings in Rebecca Bletch allegedly match up to the gun found in Willis's vehicle.
Right.
But, you know, then there's accusations out there that this other guy, the cousin, had access to the weapon, this, that, and the other thing. But look, I mean, the MO in the Rebecca Bletch case sounds an awful lot like the MO in this abduction of this 16-year-old a couple of years later. Same kind of van, there's a gun used, they track down the gun. The 16-year-old says, yes, Jeffrey Willis is the guy, I recognize him.
Right.
Okay, well, then they search get the shell casings from Rebecca Bletch, and they say that they were fired by the gun found. So you can attach the abduction of the teenager with the Rebecca Bletch case.
Right.
I think
to show to get in potential things that wouldn't necessarily be brought in, like prior bad acts, to show
practice,
exactly
that sort of
absence
stuff.
of mistake, that this was this man's sort of calling card. This was how he committed crimes, and make no mistake about it, he did it
rolls
the
up in
first
the
time.
van.
Yep.
This
is what he does.
He tries to tear off with somebody. And look, I mean, see, here's the thing. So if you look at the 16-year-old's accusations, she says he asks if I want to use the phone, and then naively she gets in the van.
Right.
Okay, the number one.
Right.
Okay, the number one no-no.
Right.
And
she was coming home from a party, apparently.
Something like that. She's this is early morning hours of April 16th, 2016. So I'm assuming dark.
Right.
Walking home, he asks if she wants to use the phone. She gets into the van. He takes off driving. She ultimately escapes as his gun jams when he tries to shoot her. So, then if you look at the evidence we have in the Rebecca Bletch case, we've got injuries to various parts of her body, which is why, again, there's a belief that this was an attempted abduction of some sort. Now, why the attempted abduction? Well, they find the defendant's got a bunch of pornography. He's got child pornography. He's got this, horrible box of bad stuff. So they start to tie it all together and say, well, it looks like his modus operandi, his MO, is to sort of roll up in this van, to try to abduct somebody, and then it ties in with all this bad stuff that he's alleged to have either done or been involved with. She's got the injuries. We heard some of the testimony yesterday from some of the first responders. By she, I'm saying Rebecca Bletch at this point. First of all, we know she was shot in the back of the head. Ultimately, they believe 3 times, according to one report. Deputy Foster testified yesterday that he observed lesions or bruising or both on the wrists, bruising on the rib cage, and there's other evidence that she had injuries on her ankles, her back, and her leg. So the ankle and the wrist thing sort of posits a supposition that she's being attacked or held or grabbed or all of the above. And her family said she's the sort of person that would have put up a fight in this situation, and the family, I think, is held on to that. It means a lot to her family that she didn't just go along with this guy, that she was a strong person who tried to fight him off. Right. But then he had the gun. That's the accusation. So you can tie this abduction of the 16-year-old in with the Rebecca Bletch case. I know that the evidence isn't 100%. I know that a lot of it's circumstantial. I know that this shell casing forensics work is oftentimes attacked for not being reliable. It doesn't always hold up, but it's not the only piece of evidence that they have. And it's really interesting. What came out in the testimony yesterday is that the phone, the sort of jogging band that's used to hold a phone, the earbuds were, they kept describing them as being neatly stacked.
Yes, I remember that.
On the other side of the road from where her body was found. So it's like, why is it? I wonder if the ultimate accusation here is going to be that he did get her in the van, at least for some distance. And then shot her either in the van or somewhere, and then tried to make it look like a hit and run, which is what the
first responders initially thought that this had been a hit and run. Only upon further inspection did they realize that she had been shot in the head.
Because if she was truly hit, why would these things be neatly stacked on the other side of the road? That piece suggests that this was set up to look like something that it wasn't. Right. So I'm really interested about that. But that's another little piece here. So look, I mean, it doesn't look good for this defendant. I mean, this does not look good for this defendant. But part of me wonders, is the defense onto something with this cousin who was the tipster in the other case, which is a different MO? Right. The other case is somebody who's, in the gas station, and it just doesn't have quite the same feel. But there's some testimony in the Haringa case that you got a silver van involved. People spotted somebody with a silver van around the time Sutton was up at this gas station, And you've got this defendant, Willis, in and out of the gas station in the preceding days. A couple of other things that came up as to the defense's opening here. What's up with the connections with Blum here? There's there's an accusation that Blum had been Facebook stalking Rebecca Bletch. Okay, what's up with that? What's the defense's evidence for making that claim? They claim it happened, okay, that Blum and Bletch's children played soccer together, that Blum and Bletch had a connection through the husband at a social club. Okay, well, if it's a smaller community, then that's not necessarily strange, but the defense is trying to weave this theory that, Blum is kind of
he's there,
got knowledge of
he's present,
these
right?
people. He's present, exactly. It's there are some things here that the defense did bring up that I'm at least curious about at a minimum. Do they necessarily point to the cousin? I don't know, but
right.
I'm curious to see what else the defense has here.
Well, I want to play for our viewers prosecution's opening arguments, which they haven't seen today yet, as we're leading into going live in the courtroom of Jeffrey Willis versus the state of Michigan. Take a listen to prosecution's opening statements.